The flies found them first. Two men, if you could still call them men. Their skin hung from their bones like wet cloth on a wire fence. Their eyes, sunk so deep into their skulls, they looked like the empty sockets of the dead. 3,000 miles, 4 months. They had crossed this cursed continent from south to north and back again. They had eaten their horses, their camels, things that crawled in the dark. And now, there, the depot. Burke's legs gave out. He crawled the last 30 yards on his hands and knees, leaving skin on the stones. The campfire. Dead. Gray ash scattered by the wind. But when his hand touched it, warm. The ashes were still warm. His fingers found the note buried beneath the tree. He held it up to the burning sky. The words swam in front of his eyes. We left this morning. 9 hours. They had missed salvation by 9 hours. They had walked 3,000 miles across hell, only to miss salvation by the length of a single shadow.
But how does a man walk 3,000 miles, only to starve beside a river? How does an expedition with 20 tons of supplies end with men eating their own boots? And what happens when the food that fills your belly is the very thing that kills you? To understand this nightmare, we must go back to August of 1860, to the city of Melbourne, where 15,000 people gathered to watch 19 men march into the unknown, and only one would ever return. They came to watch heroes march into history. 15,000 of them. Bankers and butchers. Wives in their Sunday best. Children hoisted onto shoulders, waving paper flags. They lined the paths of Royal Park like spectators at a Roman triumph, cheering for men they would never see alive again. The Victorian Exploring Expedition. That was its official name. 19 men, 26 camels imported from India at staggering expense, 23 horses, 6 wagons loaded with enough supplies to sustain a small army for 2 years, 20 tons of equipment. 20 tons. There was a cedar-topped oak camp table with 2 matching chairs. There was a Chinese gong. For what purpose, no one could say. There were rockets and signal flags, 80 pairs of shoes, beds, hats, buckets, 6 tons of firewood, as if the men expected to find no trees in a land covered with them, 60 gallons of rum. Not for the men, but for the camels, because someone had heard a rumor that alcohol prevented scurvy in dromedaries. There were rifles and revolvers and pocket charcoal water filters and enough preserved food to feed Melbourne's poor for a month. What there was not, what no one thought to pack, was a single man who knew how to survive in the bush. Robert O'Hara Burke stood at the head of the column. He was 39 years old, Irish, the son of Protestant gentry from County Galway. He had served as a cavalry lieutenant in the Austrian army. He had ridden with the Irish Mounted Constabulary. For the past 2 years, he had been the police superintendent of Castlemaine, a quiet posting, where the most dangerous thing he faced was the occasional drunk miner. He had never led an expedition. He had never navigated by the stars. He had never spent a single night in the Australian bush. But he was brave. Recklessly, stupidly brave. The kind of brave that gets men killed. He had a thirst for glory that had gone unquenched for nearly 4 decades. And now, finally, he had been given his chance. The Royal Society of Victoria had chosen him to lead the first expedition to cross the continent from south to north. 3,250 kilometers. From Melbourne to the Gulf of Carpentaria, through deserts no European had ever seen, through lands that existed only as blank spaces on the map. They chose him because he was charming,
because he was well-bred, because he looked magnificent on a horse. They did not choose him because he was qualified. Standing beside Burke was William John Wills, 26 years old, English, a trained surveyor and surgeon from Devon. He was quiet where Burke was loud, methodical where Burke was impulsive. He had spent years learning to read the stars, to measure distances, to calculate positions with mathematical precision. He had been appointed third in command, surveyor, astronomer, navigator, the man who would actually guide them across the continent, while Burke took the glory. Wills said nothing as the crowd roared. He had reviewed the supply lists, he had studied the maps, he had calculated the distances and the days and the amount of water a man needed to survive in temperatures that could reach 50 degrees. The numbers did not add up. But Wills was not a man who spoke out of turn. He was modest, deferential, the kind of man who would follow orders even when he knew those orders were wrong. It was a trait that would kill him. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Burke gave the signal to advance. The expedition lurched forward, and before they had even left Royal Park, before they had traveled a single mile, the first wagon broke down. The wheel had simply collapsed beneath the weight. 20 tons of supplies, and the wagons had been built for 5. Men scrambled to redistribute the load, while the crowd watched in awkward silence. By midnight, they had reached Essendon. Essendon, the edge of Melbourne, 7 miles from where they had started. 2 more wagons had failed. In the darkness, no one was cheering anymore. Burke stood apart from the others, staring north into the blackness. Somewhere out there, 1,000 miles away, the South Australian explorer John McDouall Stewart was already in the field, already racing toward the same prize. The government of South Australia had offered £2,000 to the first man to cross the continent. Burke would not lose that race. He would not be careful. He would not be slow. He would not listen to the quiet surveyor who told him the numbers did not work. He wrote in his journal that night, "The cursed impedimenta, the ruin of so many explorers, will not ruin me. I am determined to travel light." Light. He would dump supplies at every stop: sugar, lime juice, ammunition. He would fire men and abandon wagons and drive the expedition forward at any cost. He did not know that the lime juice he left at Balranald would have prevented 4 men from dying of scurvy. He did not know that the supplies he abandoned at Menindee would have saved his own life. He knew only that somewhere to the north, glory was waiting, and he would reach it first, or die trying. 15,000 people had cheered them out of Melbourne. In less than a year, only 1 man would return. And he would not be walking. He would be carried, half dead, babbling in a language he had forgotten, saved only by the kindness of the very people Burke had refused to trust. But that night, in the lantern-lit darkness of Essendon, no one knew what was coming. No one except, perhaps, the land itself. The bush was waiting. It had been waiting for 40,000 years. It could wait a little longer. The rain came on the 3rd day and did not stop for 2 weeks. It turned the roads to rivers. It turned the rivers to lakes. The wagons sank to their axles in mud so thick it pulled the boots off men's feet. Horses collapsed in their traces, too exhausted to stand, and had to be whipped until they rose, or shot where they lay. The expedition that had left Melbourne to brass bands and 15,000 cheering spectators now crawled across Victoria like a dying animal. 2 miles an hour, on good days. Burke rode at the head of the column, driving them forward through the muck, refusing to stop, refusing to rest. Somewhere to the north, John McDouall Stewart was making progress. Somewhere to the north, Glory was slipping away with every wasted hour. The men began to hate him. They whispered around the campfires at night when Burke was out of earshot. They said he was mad. They said he would kill them all. They said the expedition was cursed. They were not wrong. By the time they reached Balranald on September 15th, they had been traveling for nearly a month. The regular mail coach made the same journey in a little over a week. Burke stood in the rain and stared at the wagons. 20 tons. It was too much. It had always been too much. The weight was destroying them, breaking wheels, killing horses, turning every mile into a war against the mud itself. He gave the order. Dump it. The sugar went first, then the guns they could spare, the ammunition, and then the lime juice. 60 bottles of lime juice. The only thing that could prevent scurvy, the sailor's disease, the explorer's death. The disease that turned gums black and made teeth fall out, and opened old wounds until men bled from every pore. Burke did not know what lime juice did. Burke did not care. It was weight, and weight was the enemy. 4 men from the supply party would die of scurvy before the expedition was over. Their gums would rot, their joints would swell, they would bleed from their eyes and beg for death. And the cure would sit in the mud at Balranald, abandoned, until the bottles cracked and the juice seeped into the earth and disappeared forever. They pushed on, past Balranald, along the Darling River, through country that grew hotter and drier with every passing day. And as the landscape changed, so did the men. George James Landells was the camel master. It was his job to keep the 26 camels alive, the camels that had been imported from India at enormous expense, the camels that were supposed to give the expedition its edge over Stuart's horse-bound party. Landells believed in rum. He had brought 60 gallons of it, rum for the camels. He claimed it prevented scurvy. He claimed it kept them strong. He poured it into their feed every night and swore it was the only thing keeping the beasts alive. Burke thought it was nonsense. At Bilbarka, on the banks of the Darling, he gave the order to dump it. 60 gallons of rum, soaking into the red earth. The camels watched with their ancient, knowing eyes. Landells stood trembling with rage. 3 days later, at Kinshiga on the Darling, Landells resigned. He walked into Burke's tent and threw down his commission and called him a fool and a madman and a murderer of animals. Then he walked out and did not look back. Burke did not try to stop him. That same night, Dr. Herman Beckler, the expedition's surgeon, resigned as well. He had seen enough. The arguments, the chaos, the complete absence of any coherent plan. He told Burke he was leading these men to their deaths. Burke told him to get out. They reached Menindee on October 12th. 2 months. It had taken them 2 months to travel 750 kilometers. The mail coach did it in a week. Burke stood at the edge of the camp and counted what remained. 2 of his 5 officers had resigned. 13 expedition members had been fired. 8 new men, locals, strangers, men whose names Burke did not bother to learn, had been hired to replace them. The expedition that had left Melbourne was gone. What remained was something else entirely. It was here, in Menindee, that Burke made the first of his fatal decisions. He would split the expedition. The main party, the wagons, the bulk of the supplies, the slow and careful machinery of a proper exploration, would stay behind. A man named William Wright, a local with some knowledge of the country, would lead them north when he was ready. Burke would not wait for ready. He would take 7 men, 15 camels, the fastest horses,
enough supplies to reach Cooper Creek, the edge of the known world, and establish a depot. Then he would wait for Wright, and then the Gulf. Wills watched from beside his tent. He had been promoted to second in command after Landell's departure. He was now the highest-ranking officer beneath Burke himself. He did not want the position. He wanted to tell Burke that splitting the expedition was madness, that leaving the bulk of their supplies with an untested man in an unknown land was suicide, that the numbers still did not add up, had never added up, and every decision Burke made pushed them further from salvation and closer to the grave. But Wills was not a man who spoke out of turn. He packed his instruments, his notebooks, his father's pocket watch, and on October 19, 1860, he followed Robert O'Hara Burke into the darkness beyond Menindee. Behind them, William Wright watched them go. Wright had been told to follow as soon as possible. He would not leave Menindee for another 3 months. By then, it would be far too late. Beyond Menindee, the world ended. The roads vanished. The farms disappeared. The last fences fell away, and then there was nothing. Nothing but red earth and white sky, and the kind of silence that pressed against a man's skull until he thought it might crack. Burke rode at the head of the column, and for the first time since Melbourne, he was happy. This was what he had wanted. The weight was gone. The wagons, the committees, the careful men who told him to slow down. Out here, there was only the horizon, and he meant to chase it until he caught it. The advance party made good time. Recent rains had left water in the creeks and billabongs. The camels, freed from the impossible loads of the wagons, moved with surprising grace across the broken country. The Aboriginal people they encountered watched from a distance but did not approach. Wills walked the perimeter each night, taking measurements. He marked their position by the stars. He calculated the distance traveled. He noted the temperature, which climbed higher with every passing day, and the quality of the water and the nature of the soil. And he wrote in his notebook, in small, careful letters that no one else would read. They had supplies for 3 months. The Gulf of Carpentaria was over 2,000 kilometers away. Even if everything went perfectly, no delays, no injuries, no loss of animals, they would run out of food before they returned. Wills knew this. He said nothing. On November 11th, 1860, the advance party reached Cooper Creek. After the emptiness of the desert, it was a miracle. A river, a real river, winding through the red earth like a vein of life. Coolabah trees lined its banks, their gray-green leaves rustling in the hot wind. Birds called from the branches. Fish moved in the shallows. Burke stood on the bank and watched his men wade into the water. This was it. Cooper Creek, the edge of European knowledge, the last mark on the map before the great blank space that stretched to the northern sea. No white man had ever gone further. They established a depot on the creek's southern bank, Camp 65. Camp 65. Burke called it Fort Wills after his second in command, though it was nothing like a fort, just a cluster of tents beneath a massive coolabah tree, with supplies stacked in the shade and animals picketed along the water. For 3 weeks they rested. They ate well, fish from the creek, birds from the trees, the supplies they had carried from Menindee. They regained their strength. The camels recovered from the long march. The horses grew fat on the grass that grew along the banks. And Burke grew restless. Every day he walked to the northern edge of camp and stared into the emptiness. Every night he asked the same question. Where was Wright? Wright was supposed to follow with the rest of the supplies. Wright was supposed to bring the men and the equipment and everything they would need for the final push to the Gulf. But Wright did not come. Days passed. Weeks. No Wright, no supplies. No word from Menindee. And somewhere to the west, Burke knew, John McDouall Stewart was still moving, still racing toward the same prize, still threatening to steal the glory that Burke had crossed half a continent to claim. On December 16, 1860, Burke made his announcement. He would not wait for Wright. He would take a small party, just 4 men, and make a dash for the Gulf of Carpentaria. Light and fast. No wagons, no impedimenta. Just camels and horses and enough supplies to reach the northern sea and return. "We leave at dawn," Burke said. "Myself, Wills, King, and Gray. 6 camels, 1 horse, 3 months of supplies." 3 months of supplies. For a journey of over 2,000 kilometers. Through country no European had ever crossed. In the middle of the Australian summer. Wills had done the calculations 100 times. They did not have enough food. The temperatures would be lethal, over 50 degrees in the shade. The wet season would break soon, turning the northern rivers to impassable floods. If anything went wrong, a lame camel, a missed waterhole, a single navigational error, they would die out there. He knew all of this, and still, he said nothing. William Braha was 28 years old. He was a foreman, a good man, reliable, steady. But he had never commanded anything larger than a work crew. Now Burke was placing the entire depot in his hands. "Wait 3 months," Burke said. "If we haven't returned by then, use your judgment." 3 months. Braha nodded, his face pale in the firelight. Burke turned and walked toward his tent. And in that moment, Wills made his decision. He waited until Burke was gone. Then he approached Braha, his voice low, his words careful. "Wait 4 months," Wills said. "Not 3, 4. Do you understand?" Braha stared at him. "But Burke said—" "I know what Burke said." Will's grip tightened. "I've calculated the distances. 3 months is not enough. We will need 4 months to reach the Gulf and return. If you leave before then, you will be leaving us to die." Brahe nodded slowly. 4 months. He would remember that number. He would carry it with him through the long, hot weeks of waiting. He would count the days and watch the northern horizon and wonder if he was already waiting for dead men. But he would not wait 4 months. He would wait 4.5. And it would not be enough. Dawn came too soon, and when the sun rose over Cooper Creek on December 16, 1860, 4 men rode north into the unknown. Behind them, William Brahe began to count the days. The sun did not rise in the sturt, stony desert. It detonated. By 7 in the morning, the temperature was over 40 degrees. By noon, it reached 50. The stones beneath their feet grew so hot they could smell the leather of their boots beginning to cook. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing down on them like a weight they could not escape. Burke rationed the water with the cruelty of a man who understood thirst. 1 mouthful at dawn, 1 at noon, 1 at dusk. The canteens grew lighter with every passing hour, and the next waterhole was always just beyond the horizon, always just a little further than they could afford. They walked, 15 miles a day, sometimes 20, through country that had never seen a European foot, through silence so vast it rang in their ears like a bell. Charlie Gray was the first to falter. He was a sailor by trade, strong enough, willing enough, but he had never known heat like this. By the second week, his face had swollen to twice its Nate's normal size. His lips cracked and bled. He walked with his eyes nearly closed against the glare, following the sound of the camels ahead because he could no longer see them. Burke did not slow down. He could not slow down. Somewhere behind them,
The clock was ticking. Brahe was counting the days at Cooper Creek. Wright was, maybe, finally moving from Menindee. Stewart was pushing north from South Australia. Every hour mattered. Every hour could be the difference between glory and oblivion. On the 23rd day, the country changed. The stones disappeared. The red earth softened to brown, then gray. Scrub gave way to scattered trees, and the trees gave way to grass. Real grass, green and alive, rippling in a wind that carried the first promise of moisture. They had crossed the desert. They had entered the monsoon belt. But the monsoon was not salvation. It was a different kind of hell. The rain that had felt like mercy became a torrent. It fell for hours, days. It turned the creeks to rivers and the rivers to lakes. It transformed the ground beneath their feet into a sucking morass that pulled at every step, that swallowed camels to their bellies and men to their thighs. The insects came with the rain. Mosquitoes in clouds so thick they darkened the air. Flies that crawled into every opening. Eyes, ears, nose, mouth. Leeches that attached themselves to any exposed skin and had to be burned off with matches. They pressed on. 59 days out from Cooper Creek. The supplies were running low. The camels were failing. Gray could barely walk. But they were close now. They could smell it. February 9th, 1861. They reached the Bino River, an arm of the Flinders River Delta, within sight of the Gulf of Carpentaria. Burke stood on a small rise and stared at the water. It was salty. It rose and fell with the tide, 8 inches every 6 hours. The ocean was there, just beyond the mangroves, just beyond the swamp. "We have to reach the..." "Sure," Burke said. "We have to see it." Wills looked at the swamp. The mud was waist deep. The mangroves grew so thick a man could not pass between them. There were crocodiles in that water. He had seen their eyes watching from the shallows. "We'll never make it through with the camels," Wills said. They pushed 15 miles into the swamp. They found Aboriginal fishing weirs and a large hut surrounded by cultivated yam fields. The local Kukach people pointed them toward the coast, their gestures clear even without shared language. But the swamp only grew deeper. The mud only grew thicker. And after 24 kilometers of fighting through water and root and slime, Burke stopped. They could hear the waves. They could smell the salt. But they could not see the sea. Burke would write in his journal, "It would be well to say that we reached the sea, but we could not obtain a view of the open ocean, although we made every endeavor to do so." They had crossed the continent. They had walked 3,000 kilometers through desert and flood and heat that should have killed them. And they had failed at the last mile. February 13th, 1861. They began the return journey. They had food for 27 days. It had taken them 59 days to reach the Gulf. Wills did not need to say anything. They all knew. The food would run out 3 weeks before they reached Cooper Creek. They would have to move faster than they had ever moved. They would have to find food in the bush, kill animals, eat plants they did not recognize, trust their lives to a land that wanted them dead. Or they would starve. The camels groaned as they rose. Gray coughed blood into his hand and said nothing. And somewhere far to the south, at the depot on Cooper Creek, William Bra looked at his calendar and began to wonder if he was waiting for ghosts. The monsoon had come to kill them. It fell from the sky in sheets so thick a man could not see 10 yards ahead. It turned every creek into a torrent, every depression into a lake. The ground beneath their feet became a living thing, sucking at their boots, pulling at the camels' legs, swallowing everything that stood still for too long. They moved south,
15 miles a day, then 12, then 8. The food disappeared faster than they could walk. Burke had calculated 27 days of supplies. By the 20th day, they were eating the camel's feed. Charlie Gray was dying. Everyone could see it. He walked with his head down, his feet shuffling, his arms hanging limp at his sides. He fell behind constantly, and when they stopped to wait for him, he stood swaying like a man already dead, his eyes focused on something none of them could see. Burke did not slow down. There was no point in slowing down. Slowing down would not save Gray. Slowing down would only kill them all. So they pushed on, and Gray stumbled behind them, and every night they wondered if they would find him still breathing in the morning. March 4th, 1861. The camel they called Gola Singh went down and did not get up. It had carried them across 1,000 miles of desert. It had survived heat that killed horses and thirst that cracked stone. But the mud was too much. Its legs had simply failed, folded beneath it like paper, and now it lay in the mire, its great brown eyes rolling, waiting for the end. Burke stood over it with his revolver. "We can't eat it here," Wills said. "The meat will spoil in this rain." Burke lowered the gun. They left Gola Singh in the mud, still alive, unable to rise, the rain falling on its face as they walked away. They did not look back. They could not afford to look back. The food ran out completely on March 10th. After that, they ate whatever they could find. They shot birds when they could find them, crows mostly, stringy and bitter, more bone than meat. They caught a python one night and roasted it over the fire, its flesh tough as leather but filling in a way nothing else was. They killed the horse on March 15th, Burke's horse, Billy, the animal that had carried him across 3,000 miles of nothing. Burke did it himself, put the revolver to Billy's head and pulled the trigger before anyone could say a word. They butchered Billy where he fell and ate until their stomachs cramped. They dried what meat they could over the fire and carried the rest on their backs, the blood soaking through their shirts, attracting flies by the thousand. It kept them alive for another week, but it was not enough. Nothing would be enough. April 15th, 1861. Gray could no longer walk. They had been carrying him for 2 days, taking turns supporting his weight, dragging him forward when his legs gave out. But now even that was impossible. He was too weak to hold himself upright, too far gone to swallow food, too close to death to save. Burke crouched beside him. For a moment, just a moment, something human flickered in his eyes, something like pity, something like fear. "We're not leaving anyone," Burke said. It was a lie. They all knew it was a lie. Charlie Gray died sometime before dawn on April 17th, 1861. He died of dysentery, of exhaustion, of malnutrition, of the simple, grinding accumulation of everything the bush had thrown at them. He died 150 miles from Cooper Creek, 4 days from Salvation. They spent the entire day digging his grave. The ground was hard, baked to iron by the sun that had returned after the rains. Their shovels barely scratched the surface. They took turns hacking at the earth, their arms like lead, their hands blistered and bleeding. By sunset, the hole was barely 3 feet deep. They lowered Gray into it anyway. They covered him with stones to keep the dingoes away. They did not pray. Burke stood over the grave as the last light faded. He did not speak. He was thinking about time. They had lost an entire day burying Gray, an entire day of walking, an entire day of supplies they did not have. Brahe was waiting at Cooper Creek, but for how much longer? In the morning, they would rise and walk south.
3 men now instead of 4. 150 miles to Cooper Creek. 4 days if they pushed hard. 4 days if nothing else went wrong. 4 days if Brahe was still waiting. And far to the south, at the depot beneath the coolabah tree, William Brahe was making a decision. He had waited 4.5 months. His men were sick with scurvy. And on the morning of April 21st, 4 days after Gray's death, he would give the order to leave. William Brahe had not slept. He had lain awake all night, staring at the canvas above his head, counting the days for the 100th time. 118 days, 4 months and 6 days, 18 weeks of waiting at the edge of the world for men who were almost certainly dead. Burke had said 3 months. Wills had whispered 4. Brahe had given them 4.5, and still no sign. No smoke on the northern horizon, no distant figures emerging from the heat shimmer. Nothing but silence and wind and the endless, maddening drone of flies. And now William Patton was dying. The blacksmith had injured his leg weeks ago, a simple cut that had become infected, then gangrenous. Now the flesh was rotting on his bones. The smell filled the camp at night, sweet and thick and horrible. Without a surgeon, without medicine, without the lime juice that Burke had abandoned at Balranald, Patton would be dead within days. The other men were not much better. McDonough's teeth were loose in his gums. Dost Muhammad, the camel driver, could barely stand. Scurvy was killing them all. Brahe made his decision at dawn. He gathered the men around the dead campfire and told them what they already knew. "We're leaving," he said. "Today." They had waited long enough. Longer than Burke had asked. Longer than any reasonable man could expect. If Burke and his party were still alive, if they were somehow still out there, still fighting their way south, they would find the supplies Brahe was about to bury. They would find the note explaining where the depot party had gone. They would follow the trail to Menindee and safety. And if they were dead, well, then none of it mattered anyway. Brahe knelt beside the tree and carved the message himself. Dig 3 feet northwest, April 21st, 1861. His knife bit into the bark, leaving letters that would last for decades. Letters that would become the most famous epitaph in Australian history. He wrote a note and placed it in the cache. Depot Camp, April 21st, 1861. The party leaves this morning for the Darling. We have waited 4 months and 6 days for Burke's return. We leave 12 days' rations buried here. We will await word at Menindee. Then he covered the box with earth and stamped it flat. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the depot was empty. The tents were gone. The supplies were gone. Only the coolabah tree remained, its fresh scar gleaming in the morning sun. Its message, waiting for men who might never come. Brahe did not look back. He could not afford to look back. He told himself he had done everything possible. He told himself Burke would understand. He told himself the note explained everything. The supplies would sustain them. The trail south was clearly marked. He told himself a lot of things. None of them helped. The campfire ashes cooled through the morning. By noon, they were warm. By afternoon, they were barely above the temperature of the surrounding earth. But not. There was nothing left to say. Burke's legs gave out. He fell to his knees in the red dust, his hands clawing at the earth, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Gone. They were gone. Wills saw the tree. He saw the letters carved into its bark. Dear I. Burke crawled to the tree. His fingers found the disturbed earth at its base, soft, freshly turned, different from the hard-packed ground around it. He began to dig with his bare hands, his nails tearing, his fingers bleeding, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The box emerged from the ground. Inside, flour, dried meat, sugar, oatmeal. Enough to survive for weeks. And the note. Burke read the words aloud, his voice cracking on every syllable. "The party leaves this morning." This morning. He crawled to the campfire. The ashes were still warm. 9 hours. Brahe had left 9 hours ago. If Gray had not died, if they had not spent a full day digging his grave, they would have arrived in time. They would have found Brahe packing. They would have found medicine and fresh food and transport home. But they had buried Gray. And now they were buried too. Wills wrote in his diary that night, his handwriting shaky, his words barely legible. Our disappointment at finding the depot deserted may easily be imagined. Returning in an exhausted state after 4 months of the severest traveling and privation, with our legs so paralyzed that each found it a most trying task to walk just a few yards. They had crossed the continent. They had walked 3,000 miles through hell, and they had missed salvation by the length of a single shadow. April 22nd to 23rd, 1861. Cooper Creek. None of them had slept. Burke sat with his back against the dig tree, staring north into the darkness that had swallowed 4 months of his life. Wills lay on his side by the fire, his notebook open, his pen moving in slow, painful strokes. King crouched between them, feeding sticks into the flames, saying nothing. The food from the cache sat in small piles on the ground. Flour, rice, oatmeal, dried meat, sugar. 30 days of supplies. Maybe 40 if they starved slowly. "We have a choice," Burke said. His voice was flat, hollow. The voice of a man who had not yet accepted what had happened, or perhaps had accepted it so completely that emotion no longer mattered. "We can follow Brahe," Burke said. "South to Menindee, the way we came." Wills looked up from his notebook. "That's 400 miles, he said. "Through country we've already crossed. We know the waterholes, we know the route. If we move fast..." "We can't move fast," Burke cut him off. "Look at us. Look at the camels. We'd never catch them." Burke pointed southwest. "Mount Hopeless," he said. "There's a police outpost there. Cattle station. It's closer, 150 miles, maybe less." Wills closed his notebook. "We don't know that country," Wills said. "We don't know the waterholes. We don't know if the outpost is even still there." "It's closer." "Closer doesn't matter if we die of thirst getting there." Burke's jaw tightened. He had led this expedition across 3,000 miles of nothing. He had pushed them through desert and flood and starvation. He had made every decision, right or wrong, that had brought them to this place. He would make this one too. Wills did not argue. He had never argued. That was the tragedy of William John Wills. He had always known what was right, and he had never once had the courage to say it aloud when it mattered. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Against my personal judgment, we proceed southwest toward Mount Hopeless." Then he closed the book and began to pack. Before they left, they had to leave a message. Wills wrote it carefully, explaining their situation, their plan, their route. He folded it into his notebook along with letters and sketches and the careful observations he had made throughout the journey, the record of everything they had seen and done and suffered. "We bury this here," Wills said. "If anyone comes looking, they'll find it. They'll know where we went." Burke nodded. Then he paused. The local tribes, the Yandruwanda, had been watching them for months. Brahe had reported seeing them in the distance, had traded with them occasionally, had noted their curiosity about the strange white men and their stranger animals. If the UNRAVELING found the cache, they might dig it up. They might destroy the papers. They might erase the only record of where Burke and his men had gone. They filled in their cache and covered it. They smoothed the ground around Brahe's original dig site. They scattered leaves and branches and camel dung until the depot looked exactly as Brahe had left it, untouched, undisturbed, as if no one had returned at all. Wills stood at the edge of the camp and stared at their work. They had just erased themselves from history. If anyone came looking, if Brahe returned, if a rescue party arrived, if anyone thought to check the depot, they would find nothing. They would see the undisturbed cache and assume Burke's party had never come back. They would turn around and leave, and never know that 3 men had stood in this exact spot, still alive, still fighting, still hoping for salvation. Burke did not hear him. Burke was already walking southwest. They walked for 3 days. The country grew harsher with every mile, red sand giving way to gray stone, scattered scrub giving way to nothing at all. The water holes Wills had hoped to find did not exist. The outpost at Mount Hopeless might as well have been on the moon. On the second day, the camel Landa became bogged in a waterhole and could not be freed. On the third day, they shot the camel Raja when it could no longer walk. Without camels, they could not carry enough water to cross the Strzelecki Desert. Without water, they could not reach Mount Hopeless. Without Mount Hopeless, there was no hope at all. Burke stood over the dead camel and finally understood. They had made the wrong decision. They had gone the wrong direction, and now they could not go back. On April 28th, they returned to Cooper Creek. They would not leave again. The creek, the Oasis, would become their prison. The water that had seemed like salvation would become the boundary of their world. They could not cross the desert without camels. They could not follow Brahe without strength. They could only stay and wait and hope that someone, anyone, would come looking for them. And far to the south, on that same day, something terrible was happening. William Brahe had met William Wright's supply party on the trail, and together they were riding back to Cooper Creek, back to check on the depot, back to see if Burke had returned, back to the dig tree, where they would find the cache undisturbed, the ground untouched, no sign that 3 desperate men had stood there just days before. They would arrive on May 8th. They would see nothing. They would turn around and leave, and Burke, Wills, and King, starving, dying, abandoned, would never know how close salvation had come. They had become part of the landscape. 3 scarecrows propped against the bank of Cooper Creek, their bodies so wasted that the outlines of their skulls showed through their skin. They no longer walked. They crawled. They no longer spoke. They whispered. They no longer hoped. They simply existed, moment to moment, breath to breath, waiting for an end that would not come quickly enough. The supplies from Brahe's cache had run out 3 days ago. They had tried to hunt, but their hands shook too badly to aim. They had tried to fish, but they lacked the strength to hold the lines. They had tried to eat the roots and leaves that grew along the creek bank, but everything they swallowed came back up within hours, their stomachs rejecting what their bodies desperately needed. They were dying, slowly, painfully, inevitably. And then the UNRAVELING came. Burke saw them first. He tried to reach for his revolver, an instinct born of fear, of 4 months in hostile country, of every story he had ever heard about Aboriginal warriors and white men's deaths.
But his hand would not obey. It lay at his side, trembling, useless. The UNRAVELING did not attack. They stood at the edge of the camp, speaking among themselves in low voices. A woman pointed at the three white men. A man shook his head slowly. A child hid behind its mother's legs, peering out with wide, curious eyes. Then one of the men stepped forward. He crouched beside Burke and looked into his face. He saw what Burke had become. A skeleton wrapped in rags. A ghost with a heartbeat. A man who had walked into the desert thinking he could conquer it, and had been conquered instead. The UNRAVELING man reached into his bag. He held out a fish, fresh caught, silver-scaled, pulled from the same creek that Burke had stared at for days without knowing how to harvest its abundance. Burke reached for it with trembling hands. They came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. The UNRAVELING brought fish from the creek, fat silver fish that they caught with nets woven from bark fiber and techniques perfected over 40,000 years. They brought beans they called padlu, dark, nutritious, roasted over coals until they split open and released their earthy sweetness. And they brought something else, something that looked like bread. "Nardoo," the woman said, pointing at the cake. "Nardoo." Wills turned the cake over in his hands. It was made from some kind of ground seed. He could see the texture, the way it had been pounded and shaped and cooked. It reminded him of damper, the simple bread that Bushmen made from flour and water. He took a bite. It tasted like nothing. Bland, slightly gritty. It filled his stomach without satisfying his hunger, but after weeks of starvation, any food was a miracle. "Nardoo," Wills repeated, nodding at the woman. "Thank you." She smiled and pointed toward the creek, where strange, four-leafed plants grew in the shallows. A fern, he realized. She mimed the process of gathering, grinding, cooking. The UNRAVELING had lived on Nardoo for thousands of years. They knew exactly how to prepare it. But Burke was not watching. Burke was sitting apart from the others, his back to the lesson, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He did not trust these people. He did not want their help. He wanted to be rescued by white men, by civilization, by the world he understood. He wanted to return to Melbourne as a hero, not as a man who had been saved by the very savages he had been taught to fear. Wills wrote in his diary that night, "The natives have been remarkably kind. They bring us fish and a sort of bread made from the Nardoo plant. It fills the stomach, but I cannot say it gives much strength. I have attempted to learn their method of preparation, but the process is elaborate, and I am uncertain I have understood it correctly." He had not understood it. The soaking, the long, patient soaking that leached the poison from the seeds, was something he had seen but not comprehended. It seemed unnecessary, a waste of time. The UNRAVELING women spent hours submerging the Nardoo in water, changing the water, submerging it again. To Wills, it looked like superstition. To Wills, it looked like something that could be skipped. Within days, Wills had learned to gather the Nardoo himself. He found a flat stone and began grinding the sporocarps into flour, skipping the soaking, skipping the leaching, skipping the 40,000 years of wisdom that separated food from poison. He mixed the flour with water. He cooked it on hot stones. He ate it. And something began to happen inside his body, something invisible, something lethal. The Nardoo plant, Marsilea drummondi, contains an enzyme called thiaminase. In its raw or improperly prepared state, thiaminase does not simply fail to nourish the body. It attacks it. Thiaminase destroys vitamin B1, thiamine, the essential nutrient that allows the human body to convert food into energy.
Without thiamine, a man can eat until his stomach bursts and still starve to death. His muscles will waste, his mind will fog, his heart will weaken and flutter, and eventually stop. The condition is called beriberi. The Yandruwanda had known about it for millennia. That was why they soaked the Nardoo, to leach out the thiaminase, to make the food safe, to transform poison into sustenance. But Burke and Wills did not know. Burke and Wills did not ask. Burke and Wills were too proud, too desperate, too certain of their own superiority to learn from the people who had been living in this land since before the pyramids were built. The Yandruwanda stopped coming after a few weeks. Burke had driven them away, with his coldness, his suspicion, his refusal to meet their eyes or accept their help with anything resembling gratitude. They left, and they took their knowledge with them. Wills wrote in his diary, "We continue to subsist on Nardoo. It satisfies the pangs of hunger, but we derive no benefit from it. I find myself growing weaker despite eating large quantities. There is something wrong with this food, something I do not understand." Something he did not understand. Something that was killing him with every bite. May to June 1861. Cooper Creek. They ate. Every day they ate. Wills gathered the Nardoo from the creek shallows, his hands moving mechanically through the water, scooping up the small, dark sporocarps until his basket was full. He ground them on the flat stone until his arms burned. He mixed the flour with water and cooked it on the coals and divided it into 3 portions. They ate until their stomachs were full. And they starved. It made no sense. Wills understood starvation. He had felt it on the march to the Gulf, felt his body consuming itself, felt the desperate hunger that drove men to eat leather and insects and things better left unnamed. That kind of starvation was honest. It announced itself with pain and craving and the hollow ache of an empty belly. This was different. His stomach was full. He could feel the weight of the Nardoo sitting inside him, pressing against his organs, filling the space that should have meant survival. But there was no energy in it, no strength. The food went in, and hours later it came out, barely changed, barely digested, as if his body had simply given up trying to extract anything useful from it. And still, they grew weaker. Burke could no longer walk. The realization had come gradually, then all at once. First, his legs had grown tired more quickly. Then, they had begun to shake after only a few steps. Then, one morning, he had tried to stand and found that the connection between his mind and his muscles had simply broken. He could see his legs. He could will them to move, but they would not obey. The paralysis crept upward, first the legs, then the hips, then the arms. Burke spent his days propped against the coolabah tree, watching Wills and King move around the camp with increasing slowness, knowing that soon they would be as helpless as he was, knowing that the food that was supposed to save them was doing something terrible, something he could not name, could not understand, could not stop. He thought about the Yandruwanda. He thought about how they had prepared the Nardoo, the soaking, the waiting, the careful process he had dismissed as primitive superstition. He thought about the woman who had tried to teach Wills, her hands moving through the motions, her voice patient despite the language barrier. They had known. They had always known. And he had been too proud to learn. Wills still wrote. Even as his body failed, even as his mind began to slip, he maintained his diary with the obsessive precision of a scientist documenting an experiment. He was the experiment now, his own deteriorating flesh the subject of study. He wrote, May 27th. I find myself weaker than ever. Although I have eaten well of Nardoo, the food passes through us almost undigested. We seem to derive no benefit from it, yet our stomachs remain full. It is a curious sensation, to feel sated and yet to know that one is starving. He had identified the paradox. He had described it with
perfect accuracy, but he could not solve it. The thiaminase was invisible, tasteless, impossible to detect without equipment that would not exist for another century. It was destroying the vitamin B1 in his body faster than he could replace it, breaking the chemical chain that converted food into energy, turning every meal into a step closer to death. And he kept eating. What else could he do? June 3rd. My legs have failed almost entirely. I can walk only a few yards before they give way beneath me. Burke is worse. He cannot walk at all. King maintains some strength, though I know not how. We continue to eat the Nardoo. We have no choice. John King was 20 years old. He had been a soldier in the British Army before joining the expedition, young, strong, trained to endure hardship. He had carried Burke on his back when the leader could no longer walk. He had gathered the Nardoo when Wills grew too weak. He had done everything that needed doing, without complaint, without despair. But even King was failing now. The beriberi was taking him too. It started with numbness in his fingers and toes, a tingling sensation that he dismissed as fatigue. Then the weakness came, the stumbling, the moments when his legs simply forgot to hold him. He watched Burke and Wills deteriorate and knew that he was following the same path, just a few steps behind. But he did not stop eating the Nardoo. None of them did. They had become prisoners of the Nardoo. It was the only food they had. The fish were gone, the birds had fled. The Yandruwanda no longer came with their gifts of podlu beans and properly prepared bread. There was only the fern in the shallows, the sporocarps that looked like seeds of salvation and were in fact seeds of death. Wills ground the Nardoo. They ate the Nardoo. The Nardoo killed them. Every day. The same cycle. The same slow murder. Burke looked up. "We're all dying," he said. "Yes," Wills agreed. "But I mean, I understand now." Why the natives soaked the Nardoo. "There is something in it, something that poisons us, something that—" He stopped, coughed, continued. "Starvation on Nardoo is by no means unpleasant." By no means unpleasant. That was the horror of it. The beriberi did not hurt, not the way normal starvation hurt. There was no gnawing hunger, no cramping agony, no desperate screaming need. There was only a gentle fading, a slow dimming, a quiet surrender of one system after another, until the body simply forgot how to live. The Nardoo filled their stomachs, the thiaminase emptied their cells, and they drifted toward death without even the dignity of suffering. June 20th. Weaker than ever. My legs and arms are nearly skin and bone. I can scarcely crawl out of the shelter. Burke is in worse condition. He speaks of dying as if it were a journey he looks forward to taking. King alone maintains some mobility, though I doubt it will last. He paused, dipped his pen, continued. The Nardoo continues to sustain us in body, but not in strength. We eat and grow weaker with every meal. There is a lesson here, I think, some scientific principle I am too far gone to articulate. Perhaps someone, someday, will read these words and understand what we could not. Someone would read those words. 60 years later, scientists would finally understand what had killed them. They would identify the thiaminase, explain the mechanism, document the terrible irony of men starving to death with full stomachs. But by then, Burke and Wills would be legends, and legends do not benefit from understanding. Late June 1861. Cooper Creek. William John Wills had not moved in 3 days. He lay where King had placed him, on a bed of branches and dried grass, his body arranged like a corpse awaiting burial. He could feel his limbs, distantly, as if they belonged to someone else, but the connection between thought and movement had been severed. His legs were dead weight. His arms responded only to the most desperate commands, and even then they trembled so violently that lifting a cup of water to his lips had become an hour's labor. He was 27 years old. He had been born in Totnes, Devon, in a house with a garden and a view of the river. He had studied medicine and surveying. He had learned to read the stars and calculate distances and document the natural world with the precision of a scientist and the wonder of a poet. He had crossed a continent, and now he could not cross the 3 feet between his bed and the water bucket. Burke pulled himself to Wills's side. He had crawled 30 yards from where King had left him. 30 yards that had taken most of the morning. 30 yards that had cost him everything he had left. His arms shook so badly he could barely hold himself upright. But he had made it. He had needed to see Wills. He had needed to say something. Wills tried to smile. It came out as a grimace. "I believe," he said, "that I am dying." Burke did not argue. There was nothing to argue about. They had both known for weeks that this was coming. The Nardoo had hollowed them out from the inside, stolen their strength one meal at a time, left them with bodies that could no longer sustain the lives within them. "King is stronger," Wills said. "He can still walk, a little." Burke nodded. "The natives," Wills continued. "The UNRAVELING. They're still in the area. King has seen their fires. If he could find them, if he could make them understand." "They might help," Burke finished. "They helped before." Wills reached out with what little strength remained. His hand found Burke's arm. His fingers closed, weakly, barely, around Burke's wrist. "You have to leave me," Wills said. Burke shook his head. "No." "Robert." "I said no." Burke's voice cracked. "We don't leave our men. We never leave our men." "Listen to me," Wills said. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who had moved beyond fear. "I cannot walk. I cannot crawl. I cannot even stand to relieve myself. If you stay here, if you and King stay here, you will watch me die. And then you will die beside me." "Then we die together." "No." Will's grip tightened, marginally, imperceptibly. "You go. You find the natives. You let King carry you if he must. You live." "I won't survive anyway," Wills said. "You know that. We both know that. But King is young. King is strong. King might make it, if he's not weighted down by 2 corpses who refuse to admit what they are. You're asking me to abandon you." "I'm asking you to let me go." They talked for hours, about the expedition, about the decisions that had led them here, about the things they would have done differently if they had known, if anyone had told them that the Nardoo was poison, that the soaking was essential, that the UNRAVELING had been trying to save their lives. They talked about home. Burke spoke of Ireland, the green hills, the rain, the way the light fell through the clouds in the morning. He had not seen it in 15 years. He would never see it again. Wills spoke of Devon, his father's house, the garden, the books he had loved as a child. He thought of his mother, who had not wanted him to leave England, who had known, somehow, that he would not return. And then Wills asked for paper. June 27th, 1861.
Wills began his final letter. "My dear father," he wrote, "these are probably the last lines you will ever get from me. We have been in a dreadful state for the last 4 weeks. Our provisions are exhausted, and we
are reduced to collecting the Nardoo seed, grinding it, and making it into a sort of bread, on which we have been subsisting for some time. The seed is abundant and fills the stomach, but we derive no benefit from it. We grow weaker and weaker daily." He paused, dipped the pen, continued. "Burke and King are going on to try to find the natives as our only chance. I am too weak to move. I can only look forward to the grave. My spirits are excellent. There is no violent ailing of any kind, but I have a very slight feeling of hunger, no appetite, and my legs are paralyzed." He read the letter to Burke and King. He wanted them to hear it, to know that he bore them no blame, that he understood the decision, that he wanted them to go. Then he added a final line. "King has behaved nobly. I hope he will be properly cared for." They built up the shelter around him. They filled every container they could find with water and placed them within his reach. They ground enough Nardoo to last a week, if he could eat it, if his body would accept it, if he lived that long. They gave him his diary, his notebook, his father's pocket watch. "If one of us makes it," Burke said, "we'll come back for you. We'll bring help." Wills nodded. They both knew it was a lie. "Go," Wills said. "Find the natives. Live." Burke opened his mouth to say something, closed it. There were no words left. He turned and crawled out into the sunlight, King helping him, supporting him, carrying him away from the man they were leaving to die alone. He was alone now. For the first time since Melbourne, since England, since he could remember, William John Wills was completely, utterly alone. He found to his surprise that he did not mind. He opened his diary and made his final entry. June 29th, weaker than ever, although I have a good appetite and relish the Nardoo much. But it is no use. My legs and arms are nearly skin and bone. I can only see a little way now. He could not write anymore. The pen was too heavy. The words were too far away. He closed his eyes and listened to the sound of the creek flowing past, the water that had kept him alive, the water that would outlast him, the water that would still be here when his bones had turned to dust. William John Wills died alone at Brearley Waterhole on Cooper Creek. The exact date is unknown. The exact hour is unknown. He simply stopped. Stopped writing, stopped breathing, stopped being. And the bush swallowed the silence he left behind. He was 27 years old. They made it less than 2 miles from Will's shelter before Burke collapsed. His arms gave out mid-crawl. His face hit the dirt, and he did not lift it. He lay there, breathing into the red earth, his fingers clawing weakly at nothing. His body finally, completely, irrevocably finished. "Sir," King said. "Sir, we have to keep moving. The natives—" Burke's hand found King's arm, gripped it with surprising strength. "No more," Burke whispered. "No more walking. This is where I stop." King turned Burke onto his back. The commander's eyes were open, staring at the sky, that vast, blue, merciless Australian sky that had watched them cross a continent and would watch them die without comment. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, "I hope we shall be done justice to." "We fulfilled our task," Burke said. "We crossed the continent.
We reached the Gulf. We did what we said we would do." He coughed. Blood flecked his lips. "But we were not followed up as I
expected, and the depot party abandoned their post. His hand moved to his belt, found the revolver that was still there, the one weapon he had not lost, not abandoned, not traded for food. His fingers closed around the grip. He did not draw it. He did not need to. He just wanted to feel it, to know it was there, to have that one final choice still available to him, even if he never used it. "King," Burke said, "you have behaved nobly throughout." "Sir, listen to me." Burke's grip on King's arm tightened. "When they find you, and they will find you, tell them what happened. Tell them the truth. Don't let them make us into villains." Burke's eyes left the sky, found King's face. For a moment, just a moment, the hardness was gone. The pride, the stubbornness, the reckless certainty that had led them all to ruin. What remained was just a man, looking at the last person he would ever see. "Tell my family I thought of them." Then his eyes closed. His breathing slowed. His hand fell away from King's arm and from the revolver at his belt. Robert O'Hara Burke died on or about June 28, 1861. He was 39 years old. He died 2 days after leaving Will's. He died with his hand near his pistol. He died without ever admitting that any of it had been his fault. John King sat with Burke's body until dawn. He did not sleep. He could not sleep. He was 20 years old, and he was the last man alive from the party that had left Cooper Creek for the Gulf 8 months ago. Burke was dead. Wills was dead. Gray was dead. The camels were dead. The horses were dead. Everyone and everything was dead, except him. He buried Burke as best he could. It took him most of the day. His arms were weak, weaker than they had been even yesterday, and the ground was hard. He scraped out a shallow depression, rolled Burke's body into it, covered it with sand and branches and stones. He thought about going back for Wills, but he knew what he would find, and he did not have the strength to bury 2 men. The days blurred together. King walked the banks of Cooper Creek like a ghost, not searching for anything, not going anywhere, just moving, because to stop moving was to die. He ate the Nardoo that was killing him slowly. He drank the water that kept him alive. He slept in hollows and under trees, and once in the shelter where Wills's body still lay. He took the diary. He took the pocket watch. He took the letter to Wills's father. These things were his responsibility now. The last testament of his friend. The record of everything they had done and suffered and failed to survive. He would carry them until he died. Or until someone came. The UNRAVELING found him in early July. He was lying beside the creek, too weak to move, too far gone to notice their approach. His skin was burnt black by the sun. His bones showed through his flesh like tent poles through canvas. His eyes were open, but saw nothing. They thought he was dead. Then one of them saw his chest move. A breath. Shallow, barely there, but a breath. King tried to speak. His voice came out as a croak. "Please," he managed. "Please help me." They did not understand his words, but they understood his need. They took him in. These people, these savages that Burke had refused to trust, gave John King everything they had. They gave him food, fish properly caught, meat properly cooked, Nardoo properly prepared with the soaking that leached out the poison. They gave him shelter. They gave him water. They gave him his life.
King would later testify, "They appeared to feel great compassion for me when they understood that I was alone on the creek and gave me plenty to eat." Compassion. That was the word he used. Not charity, not pity, not the condescending mercy of the civilized toward the primitive. Compassion. He stayed with them for 3 months. He learned their words, their customs, their way of seeing the land, not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a home to be understood. He learned what Burke had refused to learn. He learned what might have saved them all. September 15th, 1861. King heard horses. Alfred Howitt's relief expedition had found him. They had followed the creek. They had found Burke's grave. They had found Will's body in the shelter. They had followed the trail to the Yandrawanda camp, expecting to find another corpse. Instead, they found John King, standing upright, looking at them with eyes that had seen things no man should see. King did not run to them. He did not cheer. He turned and looked at the Yandrawanda, at the people who had saved his life when his own countrymen had left him to die. "Thank you," he said. He did not know if they understood, but he thought they did. September 1861 to January 1863. Cooper Creek to Melbourne. They dug up Burke first. Howitt's men worked in silence, removing the stones King had piled, brushing away the sand, revealing what remained of the man who had led an expedition across a continent. The body was barely recognizable, desiccated by the sun, hollowed by insects, reduced to leather and bone. But it was Burke. The revolver was still at his belt. King stood apart, watching. He had led them here, had walked these banks with Howitt's men, pointing out the places where they had camped, where they had starved, where his friends had died. Each step was a memory. Each location was a grave. They wrapped Burke's remains in canvas and loaded them onto a pack horse. Then they went to find Will's. Howitt entered the shelter alone. Will's lay exactly as King had described, on his back, his hands folded across his chest, his diary beside him. The Nardoo cakes King had left were untouched. The water containers were still full. He had not eaten. He had not drunk. He had simply stopped. Howitt picked up the diary. He opened it to the last entry. June 29th, weaker than ever. My legs and arms are nearly skin and bone. He closed the diary and placed it in his satchel. This belonged to history now. This belonged to everyone. The journey back took months. They traveled to Adelaide first, then by steamer to Melbourne. King rode in silence, speaking only when spoken to, eating only when food was placed in front of him. The other men gave him space. They had seen what he had survived. They did not know how to speak to a man who had walked through death and come out the other side. December 29th, 1862. The remains of Burke and Wills arrived in Melbourne. 15,000 people had watched them leave. Now it seemed like all of Melbourne had come to watch them return. Australia's first state funeral. The coffins moved through streets lined 10 deep with mourners. Women threw flowers. Men removed their hats. Children were lifted onto shoulders to see the procession pass. To witness history, their parents said. To remember this day forever. Burke and Wills had become legends. King stood at the edge of the crowd. He had been offered a place of honor at the front with the dignitaries, with the men who had organized the expedition and then failed to support it. He had declined. He watched his friends being buried, and he felt nothing. The grief had been used up long ago, on the banks of Cooper Creek, in the shelter where Wills died alone, beside the shallow grave where he had covered Burke with stones. This ceremony was not for him. This ceremony was for Melbourne. The Royal Commission wanted answers. How had the best-funded expedition in Australian history ended in disaster? Who was responsible? Who should be blamed? They called King to testify. They called Brahe to testify. They called Wright to testify. Brahe told them about the 4 months of waiting. The scurvy, the dying men, the impossible choice between staying and watching his party die, or leaving and hoping Burke would find the supplies. He told them about returning on May 8th with Wright, about finding the cache undisturbed, about leaving again, never knowing that Burke and his men had been there, that they had erased all trace of their presence, that salvation had come within hours of their grasp, and then walked away. The commission issued its findings. Burke had shown a far greater amount of zeal than prudence. His decision to leave Cooper Creek before the supply party arrived was condemned. His choice to leave no trace at the dig tree was called catastrophic. Wright's conduct was deemed reprehensible. His 3-month delay at Menindee had doomed the expedition before it ever reached the Gulf. Brahe received some sympathy, but not forgiveness. John King never recovered. The government gave him a pension. The public gave him fame. But the nightmares never stopped. The dreams of walking through endless red desert, of eating food that turned to poison in his stomach, of leaving Wills alone in that shelter and hearing the silence that followed. He married. He had children. He died in 1872 at the age of 31. The doctors said it was tuberculosis. King knew it was something else. He had left part of himself at Cooper Creek, the part that knew how to live without remembering. And that part had never come back. The tree still stands. 160 years later, the Coolabah tree at Cooper Creek still bears the marks of that April morning, the letters DIG carved into its bark, the camp number, the date. Tourists come from around the world to see it. They stand in the same spot where Burke fell to his knees. They touch the same bark that Wills touched. They try to understand. But understanding is not the same as learning. The lesson of Burke and Wills is simple. The land cannot be conquered. It can only be understood. The Yandrawanda understood it. They had lived on Cooper Creek for 40,000 years, eating the Nardoo that killed the white men, thriving in a landscape that Burke saw only as an obstacle. They knew that the desert was not an enemy. It was a teacher. And Burke had refused to learn. Australia built monuments to Burke and Wills, statues in Melbourne, plaques along the route, a mythology of heroic failure that celebrated the men who died rather than the people who might have saved them. But the bush does not care about monuments. The bush does not remember heroes. The bush only remembers the ones who listened and the ones who did not. They had walked 3,000 miles across hell. They had crossed a continent that had never been crossed. They had reached the northern sea and turned back, believing that glory awaited them. But the land does not give glory. The land only gives lessons. And the men who will not learn them, the land buries.